The search for bin Laden was one of the greatest intelligence successes of our lifetime. What worked and what didn't? What does this tell us about the capabilities and limitations of American intelligence? This marks a change to the traditional American way of intelligence. Are we facing a sea change today?
The question that I tried to answer is, how did we get to that famous photo of the White House Situation Room, where President Obama and his top advisors were watching the raid on bin Laden's compound at Abbottabad happen? How did we get there, and why did it take 10 years for the American intelligence community to be able to provide enough information for the American Special Forces to carry out that raid? What did it take to find Osama bin Laden? Admiral William McRaven, who was the military commander of that raid on Abbottabad, has described the raid as one of the greatest
intelligence operations in history.
And in fact, he wasn't just talking about the raid itself. He was talking about the decade-long search for bin Laden. But he also has said that he doesn't think that the American people will be able to learn the results of that and learn what it was that helped us find Osama bin Laden for decades to come. And in fact, there hasn't yet been an official study or after-action report about the intelligence operation that helped us find Osama bin Laden. So what I did was try to find everything that's in the open press, all the information that's been released about the search for Osama bin Laden, and try to find out how it was that we found him. Well, the first thing that I found was what didn't work. What tools and tricks and tips of the American intelligence community didn't help us in the search for bin Laden. I found that, in fact, after 9/11, we tried all the standard tools and techniques in the American intelligence arsenal to try to find Osama bin Laden, and most of those didn't work. We tried everything from putting out playing cards showing what bin Laden might look like if he had shaved off his beard and put on a suit. We tried using all the latest computer software, including programs such as by the company called Palantir. And that software is today used by a wide variety of national and state and local homeland security and local law enforcement offices. But 10 and 12 years ago, this was really cutting edge, but it didn't help us find bin Laden. In fact, what the American intelligence community tried was to use all of the traditional methods of American intelligence, those methods that had worked during the Cold War when the enemy was the Soviet Union. The traditional American way of intelligence has relied on money, manpower, and technology. And we used all of those. We used money. We offered a $25 million bounty for anyone providing information to help us find Osama bin Laden. We used manpower. We were able to use all the resources of the American intelligence community and often putting in the area of Afghanistan and Pakistan as many human intelligence collectors as we possibly could. And we used technology in all sorts of ways, including, according to press reports, tapping telephone calls of journalists who might have received some of the videotapes from Osama bin Laden. But none of those traditional tools of American intelligence worked. And in fact, one of the things that wasn't enough, that didn't work, was the use of imagination. Now, the 9/11 Commission argued after 9/11 that one of the things that we should have had more of in the American intelligence community was imagination. They argued that if only the intelligence analysts before 9/11 had been able to think outside the box, had had the imagination to even conceive of such a plot as was carried out on 9/11, then maybe we would have been able to prevent it. Well, I think that the search for bin Laden after 9/11 demonstrates that imagination isn't enough, because there were lots of wonderful, imaginative ideas used by the American intelligence community in the search for bin Laden. But they didn't work, such as, just to tell one quick story about that, back in the days when bin Laden was actually releasing videotapes, back in the old VHS tape days, the idea was perhaps we can see what indications are in the background of some of these videos to determine where the videos had been taken. And for instance, in one video, they heard the chirping of a bird, an unusual sounding bird in the background. The American intelligence community had the assets to be able to find the best ornithologist, the best bird expert in the world, who turned out to be in Germany, to try to identify what the chirping of that bird was. Now, if this had been a television show or a movie, they probably would have found out that that bird only exists in a 15 square mile area in Pakistan. We would have gone there and found him. But it didn't work. The bird expert wasn't enough. Imagination itself isn't enough to find bad guys and stop bad things from happening. How could it possibly be so difficult? Why could it possibly take over 10 years to find the most wanted man in the world? To find the most recognizable terrorist in the world, a 6'4" very identifiable bad guy? Well, one of the reasons it took so long is because in the intelligence business, it's widely known among intelligence experts that in order to find something, you first have to do what we usually call a wide area search. You have to use some tools and techniques, satellites, imagery, drones, those sorts of things, in order to narrow it down your search. And once you've narrowed down the search, then you use other tools and techniques to actually try to find what you're looking for. And another way to look at it is that in the Navy, we often talk about the big ocean, little boat theory. And that idea is that in a big ocean, it's very hard to find a little boat, one specific target. One recent case that we all know about, of course, is the case of that Malaysian airliner that appears to have been lost over the Indian Ocean. How is it possible that in this modern day we could lose a Boeing 777? Well, we did. And in much the same way, it was very hard to find one particular very bad guy. Well, then what worked? That's what really is more interesting and more important. What seems to have been some of the tools and techniques that the American intelligence community used in order to find Osama bin Laden? The first method that they used is what we call all-source analysis, and the thinking, the work of analysts who actually were able to piece together over a decade the many pieces of information that helped us find eventually that compound in Abbottabad and bin Laden. One of the interesting developments was that we saw after 9/11 a key role for female analysts in the CIA and elsewhere within the intelligence community. And actually, before 9/11, we'd already seen that female analysts had played a particularly strong role in the search for bin Laden before 9/11. In fact, when the CIA in the 1990s had set up a separate bin Laden station, a virtual CIA station devoted to searching for bin Laden and trying to combat al-Qaeda, many of the members of that organization, that station, were women. And many of them seemed to be obsessed with bin Laden, so much so, in fact, that many of their colleagues at the CIA appear to have referred to them as the Manson family. But it wasn't just women, it was also male analysts, such as one CIA analyst who was later, after 9/11, discussed in an Associated Press story as John. He was called John. And he and the analysts who worked for him, had read open source materials. They had read books about bin Laden. They had read the sort of unclassified material that back in the old days of the Cold War wasn't given much credibility in the intelligence community. But one of the little tidbits that they found, for instance, was that in a book written about bin Laden by one of his many sons, one of bin Laden's sons had written that at one point bin Laden had said that if you want to avoid American airstrikes, the best place to live, the best place to go, is in the middle of a big city, sort of the hiding in plain sight mentality. And this got some of the analysts, including John, thinking that maybe bin Laden wasn't hiding in those mountainous, sort of ungoverned areas on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Maybe he wasn't actually living in a cave, as most of us were thinking back in the early years after 9/11. Maybe he was hiding more in plain sight, as it turns out that he was. What we finally found was the key to locating bin Laden was identifying his courier. And even the search for bin Laden's courier itself took many, many years. That identification of his courier started, in fact, before 9/11 itself. When an al-Qaeda operative attempted to come into the US, he attempted to fly into Orlando Airport. He was stopped and turned away. We later learned that waiting for him on the other side of security at Orlando was Mohammed Atta, the operational leader of the 9/11 attacks that were only a month away. Well, this man was sent away from the country. We later apprehended him at the Battle of Tora Bora after 9/11. He was later interrogated at Guantanamo Bay, and he indicated that one piece of information that he knew was that there was one person who was particularly important for some reason in Al-Qaeda, and that man was known as the Kuwaiti, from Kuwait evidently, but he didn't know why that person was important. Well, that was just one piece of information. And several years later, another Al-Qaeda suspect was evidently, according to open source reports, was interrogated by the CIA. And this other person indicated that, well, yes, he had heard of this man known as the Kuwaiti. And he believed that he was bin Laden's courier, that bin Laden had one person who was his connection to the outside world, and that was the guy known as the Kuwaiti. Now, this was good news and bad news for the American intelligence community. It was good news because it at least gave us one clue, one thing to go on. We didn't have a name yet, but at least we knew there was one person who could be the key. But it was bad news because it indicated there was only one courier, only one link between bin Laden and the outside world. Now, several years later, evidently due at least in part to National Security Agency NSA wiretapping, the intelligence community was able to identify the real name of this person known as the Kuwaiti, al-Kuwaiti. And then, a couple of years later after that, CIA agents in the employ of the CIA in Pakistan were able to track down, and they were able to spot this person, bin Laden's courier, driving in the area of the city of Peshawar. They expected that this courier would be still driving up to that mountainous region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, because still most of the conventional views, most people in the intelligence community assumed that bin Laden was hiding in the middle of nowhere. But instead, bin Laden's driver started driving east in Pakistan toward eventually the town of Abbottabad and the compound that then became famous. But now the question was bin Laden in the compound at Abbottabad? Or was this just a safe house or just a place where the courier and his family lived? And that really started the second chapter of the search for Osama bin Laden.